Welcome back to Becoming Unbound, the podcast where we dive deep into the journeys of those who have broken free from the traditional path and created a life on their own terms. This show is all about the pursuit of freedom, whether that means leaving a 9-to-5 job, redefining success for yourself, or stepping into a more authentic version of yourself. Each episode, we have real, unfiltered conversations with incredible people who have embraced the challenge of building a life that aligns with their passions, their values, and purpose. Today, I am joined by the incredibly talented Eden Broda. She's a true creative force, an actress, director, writer, and all-around phenomenal human being. Eden has carved her own path in the industry, breaking free from the expectations of others, and even the ones she has placed on herself. Her journey is a testament to the power of self-discovery, resilience, and embracing creative freedom. I cannot wait for you to hear her story. Let's dive in. This is so exciting.
This is fun. I've been waiting for this. I've just been like, oh, let me on the mic. I'm excited.
I remember having the conversation where we kind of like, when we were away on that retreat, and I was like, we were having this conversation, and I kind of was like, oh my God, stop. We need to stop talking and save this exact conversation. The podcast. So that was kind of the realization. And I love having, like, I don't know, I just feel like I'm surrounded by such incredible people that need to be on the podcast. So I'm so happy that you're here today.
It's great. Yeah, you definitely had kind of a little wealth of people there to really kind of, pick their brains and be like, all right, let's unpack this on my podcast. I love it. It's great.
Yeah, put a pin in this conversation and we'll put it together on the podcast. Great. So Eden, let's tell the listeners a little bit about how we connected.
Okay. How lovely Carly and I connected was, I would say it was late 2021, somewhere around there. We were both members of Kaylor Bett's Awake and Winning program. We were both in that group that was kind of a real refuge for a lot of people, particularly coming out of the pandemic, looking for community, looking for like minds. And Carly was one of the only other Ontario girlies that I really kind of resonated with. I think she became my first accountability buddy of sorts. And we started chit-chatting. And so we knew each other virtually for quite a bit through this group. But then she hosted a get to know ya for all the other Ontario girls. Yeah. And then we all went over, and you could tell there was like this moment of, okay, we're all in the same room now. And we know we all think the same, but everyone was really afraid to talk. And then, give it 20 minutes and all of us were doing little breakout groups and just having great conversations. So she was a real facilitator for me. And just as a side note, like that, little get together in tandem with the group was such a pivotal moment for me, because it was my first kind of click where I was like, I'm not alone. This is great. And they were such amazing women. So yeah, that's how we met. And then we were roommates at our retreat, which is even better. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Why do I feel like I had a little brain fart about that whole gathering. That was amazing. And that was like, we all got together, and it was like this slow unraveling of these women. We were all like kind of quiet at first. We're like, what can we talk about?
It was a slow burn for sure.
And then all of a sudden, I feel like it might have been even you that was all of a sudden like, oh my God, I can say anything in this group and it's going to be received. Like, and I think, we've talked about this on the podcast before. It's just like when you find community that all of a sudden you can just be your authentic self with and say the stuff that you saw in the day, the things that are on your mind, all of a sudden you're like, just this whole other version of you can be almost like birthed, and it's so beautiful. And I remember you just being like, oh my God, I think that was like your first time being able to just like voice the things that you've been seeing over the past couple of years that you're like, oh my gosh, none of this makes any sense to me. But like, I kind of have kept it to myself and like been just going along with what we can, do. And it's just like, it was a tough time for all of us, but I just remember your excitement around that time.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, it was crazy because, and I now that you brought it up, that's my brain fart. I totally forgot that I said that. But I remember in that moment thinking like, oh my gosh, I need a podium and all my cue cards because I got stuff to say kind of thing. And it was so, like you said, a rebirth of, oh yes, this is what it is to have, normal, in-depth conversation and not feel like you have to censor yourself or walk on those eggshells. And it was great. And then, I mean, you also introduced me to dates with butter and sea salt that day, which was also another real coup for me.
Dates, butter, if you can get unpasteurized, even better, and a
Yeah.
little bit of sea salt on top. Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Yeah, life
Don't knock
changing.
it till you
It's
try
so
it. It's amazing.
So that's how we met. And then we did this beautiful retreat. We were kind of connected through Kaylor's group. Again, this podcast just continues to be an ongoing plug for Kaylor
Yep.
Betts.
Very true.
So I wanted to ask you, what was kind of, and we talk a lot about freedom and becoming unbound, and what was kind of the moment in your life? I mean, I know a little bit of your background, but let's tell the listeners, what was that moment where you were like, things either don't make sense, or I know that I can do things a little bit differently? Like, what sparked that awakening for you?
Ooh, well, I love this question because for me, it wasn't where I thought it was going to be when I initially kind of thought about it. Um, but the real moment for me actually happened in high school. Because I was a homeschooled kid. I didn't go into school until I was in about grade 7. And so I was in this wonderful little bubble of naivete when it came to people, expectations, my peers, not in a sheltered way, but just in a, you know, who could possibly dislike me? What could possibly go wrong? And then high school, as I'm sure many people can empathize, pops that bubble real quick. And for me, it became very clear early on. I would say probably end of grade 9. I started to feel like a bit of an alien. Not the fun I can talk to extraterrestrials kind, but the kind that was different and was bullied for it. And there was a lot of frustration for me around that because I was always raised. My parents really instilled in me, strength of character, kindness, the value of being unique. And so I literally was in this position where I was like, well, but nothing's wrong with me. I'm nice to everybody. I was so genuinely confused when I think back to that little 13, 14-year-old Eden. I was like, oh, bless you. Sweet, sweet baby angel. Um, but that was kind of a moment where all of a sudden all these things started collapsing on me. And I started realizing that, oh, someone can just dislike you because you're different. And that could be a bunch of different things. It could be because of the way you look. It could be because you are you're braver than them. It's because you can talk to boys without, falling apart and getting red in the face. It could be anything. And it became very clear to me that no matter what I did, I was generally despised, or that's how it felt. That's how I internalized it. Um, and this experience really sparked that realization that all of a sudden I was being put in a box and I started becoming a bit of a shell of the vivacious, carefree little rebel that I had been leading up to high school. She started to kind of dim a little bit. And I realized it was because of my perception of what I should be, or the kind of thing that is popular, the kind of thing that is liked. They weren't lining up with what I had previously perceived as what should be popular and what should be celebrated. And it was a very confusing time for me. So that was the first kind of, I don't really feel free anymore moment. And it was about 14, 15 maybe. Yeah.
And you had spent so much time being free, like having a homeschooled life. I can imagine there's so many freedoms that these other children, like, you go to school, you sit down, you're in a desk, and like you just get, it's ingrained in you that you are just stuck in this classroom, and there's like you're shackled to this desk and
Yeah.
whatever it may be. To go from this homeschooled life all of a sudden into this place where there's tons of social dynamics, like I'm sure our listeners can resonate with this, like the social dynamics. Oh my gosh, high school is like such a messy, icky time.
Yeah.
For you to have that self-awareness, like, that is kind of incredible that it hit you that young, that you were like, "Wait, I'm pretty cool, and yet then I'm being put in this box and being told that I'm not cool. What in the heck and bob is going on?"
Yeah. Oh, and that's literally what it felt like. I mean, I credit my parents a lot, not only just for having the intestinal fortitude to homeschool 3 children, but I credit them so much because we were not only raised by them with their strong morals and their creativity and fearlessness. We were kind of raised by a community of a creative family, a very dynamic family in terms of work and what you do for a living and all this kind of stuff. And so being different was quite literally celebrated in my house, and it was never a problem. um, when we were homeschooled, we were allowed to kind of gravitate towards what sparked us. That's how I became an actor. Was my parents, God bless them, they put me in everything, put me in sports, put me in dance, put me in whatever. Couldn't be bothered. And then they took me to a play when I was 5. And I remember looking at this, like, I don't know, mid-20s actress just belting out this Les Mis, belting out on my own on stage. And I looked at my mom and famously said, I could do that. So this was the kind of like boldness that I feel like I had instilled in me when I was 5 years old. And so to have it, you know, to all of a sudden feel this total switch in my teens when I was actually very excited to go to high school. I was a very social kid. So to have this switch, I was like, well, hold on. This is my whole world is turning over here. And as great as it was, like you said, feel lucky that I had that realization so young. At the same time, you don't have the emotional or mental faculties to process it at that time. So it results in you just doing whatever you need to do to survive. And for me, that was to dumb myself down because other people were intimidated or jealous, whatever the case may be.
How did that I'm so curious about homeschooling because I think you are essentially like there are so many mothers and families right now that are having I particularly also have this dream of homeschooling. So you are like the result of what I think there's a whole new age of moms and families that want to do this. So it's like we get to see this real life version of like this is the possibilities for your children. And there's tons of people that have been homeschooled and lived a beautiful, wonderful, enriched life. So how did homeschooling like influence who you are today? Because that was one of the questions that when we first met and I met you and I was like, oh my God, you were homeschooled. Like, how did you turn
How did that
out so
work?
amazing? Work? Because I think there's so many of us that are so curious about like what happens when they're 14, 15 and you're not just like mom's the
Yeah.
teacher anymore.
Oh,
How does that work?
absolutely. I can't I first of all, I'll say I can't recommend homeschooling enough. Not only because I got to live it as a kid, but also because I got to be raised by my parents, which I think, barring any, yeah, I got to do school in my PJs while eating cereal at the kitchen table. Like all those things are great. But in hindsight, I got to be around the people who are supposed to raise your kids. And this is not a dig to any teachers or caregivers out there, but I do think a lot of it is being outsourced. And I personally reap the benefit, and I'm very blessed to have reaped the benefit of being raised by my family. So I can't recommend it enough. That being said, growing up in a homeschool community, results may vary. I've definitely met some very interesting homeschoolers. And everyone has their own way of doing it, right? There are some people that go the total one end of the spectrum where it's like free range children, do whatever you want. I don't necessarily think that's quite helpful. And then there's the people who make it very regimented. And oftentimes there's like a real religious base in that regimentation. I don't know if that's a word. Regime. Pretend I didn't say that. So it always had this kind of undertone. But that being said, I do find that a lot of the misconceptions about homeschoolers is that that's all there is. It's, oh, you're homeschooled. You're probably super religious. You're probably super sheltered. How are your kids being socialized? I was 20 times more socialized than my peers by the time I went into public school. and not just socialized with my peers. I was socialized. I could talk to the elderly. I could talk to adults. I could advocate for myself, oftentimes a little too much, to the chagrin of my teachers. And I never felt like I missed out on anything. And being homeschooled, we also got a chance to kind of have a bit of a patchwork education. So, my mom did a bulk of the more, reading, writing based stuff. And then my family are just full of math phobes. So we outsourced that. So we had a lovely tutor that came in and helped us with our math. She became kind of a part of the family. And then kind of slotted in other things. My dad would take us out to the bush and teach us about animals and nature and all that kind of stuff. And we weren't afraid to get dirty. My uncle taught us about money. And it was just, it was a very colorful education. And so people who are looking into homeschooling, it can seem daunting, especially, when I think about my parents, my siblings and I are all exactly 2 years apart. So we were a lot at home. And with my sister having dyslexia and my brother having dysgraphia and also being very gifted, and then me having ADHD, we were just the trifecta of children. And my parents did it. And it's daunting, especially in a world where teaching your kids can be outsourced so easily. Or if you just want a break, you just want to put an iPad in front of your kid. You just want an afternoon to yourself. And then this is no judgment on people who do need to use those resources depending on your situation. But if you can, to this day, I will say it's the best thing you can do for your kids. And again, I wasn't homeschooled all the way through. I ended up going to school in grade 7 and thriving. I mean, I didn't feel like I fell behind in any way. Like any kid, I had my strengths and weaknesses. Math for me has always been the big one. But I thrived, and it took a little while to get used to the structure and having someone tell me when I could eat, when I could go outside. That was a little odd for me, but you're older and you learn to kind of figure it out. Instead of having to be conditioned as a young, 3-year-old, I think is when you go into kindergarten, something like that. And that's another thing too. We all did kindergarten, all of us, because we had a wonderful kindergarten teacher that my mom wanted all of us to experience before she took us out of school. And so we did have a little bit of that early, dabbling with school. But in the long run, yeah, being homeschooled was the best thing that ever happened. I think it made me who I am today, to be honest.
What a beautiful message. I absolutely love that, especially as someone who inspires to homeschool my future children and family. Like, that is something that I think I have a lot of faith in it, but then to see real life individuals who have been through the whole thing and also experienced different parts of the homeschool life. And I think there's so many misconceptions around what
Oh
homeschooling
gosh, yeah.
really can be. And I always love the question of the socialization. It's like, okay, but socialization of being in a class of 20 other people who are all the same age as you, that is also not normal. I do
No.
not hang out with, it's not like I'm hanging out with a bunch of just other 34-year-olds for my whole life, and that's the only people I hang out with. It's like the variety of life and the beautiful parts of life is that you get to hang out with younger people and people with wisdom, and it's just so incredible that yeah. And I can imagine that you would just be going up to talking to everybody because that was the exposure that you had, where you were like, well, of course I just talk to everybody.
Yeah, why wouldn't I?
Why wouldn't I? Why do I only need to talk to other grade 4 students? That is kind of a ridiculous concept.
It is. And it's, what I heard, I've heard it a couple times, but I think Jordan Peterson was the one who said, the best thing you can do for your children is to raise them into agreeable adults and raise them into, not only when they're children, but as they grow up, into people that people enjoy being around. The biggest disservice you can do is to make a disagreeable human being, essentially. And I find when you take accountability for your child, you have so much more agency in the person they become. And I mean, we know family structure is always going to be different. People come from all different kinds of backgrounds, but those first years, it's the difference between being the kid that, your other friends' parents love having over because they're so polite, they've got manners, they play nicely. And the kid who, he's like, oh, he's coming over again. Okay, how long is he here for? And we were never those kids. And you don't realize it when you're in it. But when I look back, we were always well received. But it's because my parents let us know that it's a privilege to be in somebody else's home. It's a privilege to go to a restaurant. And it was just, yeah, it was instilled in a firm, but I don't ever remember feeling like my parents were strict. It was more just we knew the rules. My parents loved the 1, 2, 3 rule. I don't know if you're I don't know if you're familiar with that, but if we were acting up, my mom would just look at us and go, "That's one," and you'd go, "Oh, okay." And then if you accidentally started doing it again or whatever, she'd be like, "That's 2," and you knew that if she got to 3, game over. It means you left the restaurant, means you went home, means you didn't get the thing you wanted, or whatever the case may be. But it never felt strict. It just felt, this is the way things are, and you abided by it.
And it's so wonderful then to see that you are such a well-received human being now. Like I watch you, the few encounters that we've had, you in a room, and I'm sure like this goes to the training and the acting and the directing that you've been on. Like there is a sort of way that you have to hold yourself, but I do see like you are like you could put you in a room with anybody and you could thrive. Not only would you be just okay, and you would survive any social situations, like you would thrive and you would be probably one of the most memorable people there. So
Oh,
I
thank
like
you.
kudos to your
Well,
parents
thank
for
you.
doing
I mean, you know what? It definitely, like you said, it's a lot of the acting training and stuff. It really kind of, you know, actors or creatives, artists, they always tend to be quite animated people. And that's great. But as an actor myself, I know that sometimes that can be annoying. So I think what the beautiful blend was the way I was raised, coupled with that enthusiasm and kind of color that I had naturally as somebody who ended up being an actor and a creative. And it worked together. So I have social graces, and you know, I have boundaries and things like that. Whereas, some people don't. But that's what makes a difference, is just having that basis in, social. I don't want to say not conformity, but reading the room, and being able to kind of almost think of yourself as a big like DJ dial pad. And you're like, okay, in this group, and that's a bit much. We're going to dial it down a little bit, and learn to be a bit of a social chameleon. And it's great. It's a lot of fun, and it puts you in front of people that maybe you wouldn't always get the chance to be in front of. As an actor, I mean, some of my best friends are all over the map. I've got friends who are in the medical field. I've got friends who are, fellow creatives. I've got friends who are mechanics and geologists, but it doesn't matter, because there is a common ground there, because you get to kind of play with your interests, and it enriches your life. It really does.
It's so cool. And I love what you said way back, of like the sort of allowing when parents kind of like offload the responsibilities of raising their own children. I think I saw that a lot as a teacher. It would be like, I feel like I was constantly just like handed children. They're like, here. And I'm like, okay, great. Do you know, like, and then it would come to like simple tasks like blowing your nose. And you're like, did nobody before me teach you how to blow your nose? Are you like, and it's just those little things, or like how to like, get around a human being. Like if you're needing some space, of like how to use your voice to be like, excuse me, or these little basic things that I find nowadays, there's more of just this like, oh, I don't need to teach them that. It's going to be like the teacher will do it or the school will do it. And it's just sort of this offloading of like, no, to me, I believe that is truly a parent's responsibility. And I saw it so much where they were like, just here's my child.
Yeah.
And I think accepting and fully embracing that responsibility. And I know it can feel like a lot, especially in your case with 3 kids, but it's something that I think we really have to be mindful, because if you're handing them over to like this factory setting, you're like, here you go, set them into the factory setting so that we can move along in society. And it's I don't know, there's something really displaced about that. There's really something missing.
Oh, yeah.
My next question, I wanted to sort of ask that when you entered that, I know you experienced a lot of limitations and challenges. So how did that shape your future of like navigating through that high school thing of understanding, the expectations, all that kind of stuff that you experienced when you then got inserted into the high school public
Yeah.
system?
So kind of like the next step into kind of getting over that. I would say I had a light bulb moment in high school. And if I had to put an umbrella term around what kind of the next step forward for me was the idea of changing my perspective. But when you're a teenager, it's hard to change your perspective. You don't have a lot of life experience. Emotions are running high, and all you know is that you just want to be liked. And not a lot of people say it, but in high school, you just want to be liked. And this was this crazy notion that I'd never dealt with before, but I needed my perspective changed. And that happened for me with this light bulb moment. Was all through high school for, varying reasons. I was never invited to parties, ever. I was never included in any of the popular kid activities for whatever reason they dreamed up. But there was a time, I would say, in the thick of it, so it probably would have been beginning of grade 11. I was dating a boy at the time who brought me with him to one of these parties. And he was my in. I got to go. And I remember being so excited, but also so desperate and panicky. And it was the first time in my life where I'm like, what do I wear? How do I act? And because I never had these things before. And they all started cropping up on the day of this party. And we went. And just for some context, these were all the people because again, this is at the height of Facebook. And these are all the people that would post pictures from fun events and parties all the time, looking like they were just living their best life, having the best time possible. And I went to this party and it was terrible. It was the most boring thing. Everyone's standing around. Nobody cool was there. I mean, other than my boyfriend, but like everyone sucked. And I didn't understand. I was like, this is supposed to be it, right? Like these are where all the cool people are. And at one point during the night, I saw this image so well, Carly, I'm sure. I saw a bunch of girls holding hands and going into the bathroom. And that's what girls do, apparently, when they go into bathrooms. And I just happened to kind of like peek over and they didn't close the door. And so I peeked over and they were all taking these selfies in the mirror. And they all looked like they were having the best time. Their all arms are draped over each other. They're doing all the, kissy duck faces and all that kind of stuff that I'd seen on Facebook so much. And it was just like this literal clunk where everything just sank in. I was like, oh, this is bullshit. Like this is all bullshit. This is all smoke and mirrors. And it was so crazy to me because I ended up learning the phrase that I needed that same week, which was perceived popularity. And for me, I was, kind of stunned that I had given so much of my time and energy, not only the day of this party, but leading up to it in these years. I just wanted to go. I just wanted to be accepted. And then I went, had a terrible time, and then went home and saw all those pictures that these girls were taking. And knowing that if I hadn't been at that party, that would have made me feel awful. I would have seen those photos and I would have been like, oh, again, I wasn't invited. They look like they're having so much fun. Like, why am I not invited to these things? So it was so crystal clear to me that I'm like, what the hell have I been doing? These people are not what I want to be. They're not doing the things I think they're doing. And that was the first major shift. I was like, I don't want to be like any of them. So I'm just going to stop trying. And just the realization of that for me was the freedom. Was all of a sudden, I felt like I approached my life, my high school, my friends totally differently. Was because it was that first, how we always describe like either the wool is pulled off your eyes or whatever. I had clarity. I had a lot of clarity and just decided that, okay, with this clarity, I'm going to have to rethink some things. And that's where the first big shift happened, I would say.
Oh, I love that. it was like the curtain was drawn away from like the wizard and you saw everything. And all of a sudden it's just this tiny man behind a curtain with a big microphone. And it is, I think you're talking about like almost the beginning first implementation of like the Instagram highlight reel
Yes.
that you can watch all these people doing all these things. And I remember having this moment for myself too, where it was like I would do things just to take a picture of me doing those things.
Yeah.
And when I had my awakening, I was like, I think I'm just doing all of these things so that I can have a picture of me taken doing these things so that I could tell people that I did it, not because I genuinely wanted to do it.
Yeah. And it's crazy how much joy and in the moment experience you miss out on just because you want to get the photo or you want to get the content. And I feel lucky in that way because I had that experience. Things like Instagram never bothered me. I post when I want. If I have a cool photo, sure, I'll post it. If I have something funny to say, sure, I'll post it. But I don't give a rat's ass about, these people that have these perfect photos and travel the world and all this kind of stuff. Like, of course, you see these things that you're like, oh, that's really cool that they're doing that. But I feel so lucky that I had that early exposure of Facebook, because then by the time Instagram and now TikTok and goodness knows what else became so prevalent, I just was like, no, you're not gonna miss me with this bullshit. Okay. I've been there. So yeah, that idea of perceived popularity then turned into perceived success, perceived perfect relationship, perceived acting career. I mean, the actors nowadays, you have to have a social media presence in order to sometimes get jobs. If you have more followers, you're more likely to get cast. And even though I know that that's a huge part of my job now, I still don't have it in me to care. I don't care. I have a private account. I've always had a private account. And I just don't get the point of judging or hiring or, basing your opinion off of what somebody posts online. So I feel very blessed in that way that I had that early exposure to that toxicity.
Oh man, we hang up everything on those
Yeah.
expectations and the things that come with it. And it's so cool that you had that perspective change so young and that you were able to sort of be like, oh no, I see all of you.
Yeah.
I see all of this and it's just not for me. And you chose to like stick with that. And
Yeah.
that's pretty incredible. Again, kudos to your parents.
Well, and you know what? I mean, kudos to my parents, and also it became kind of like a real starting point for me when it came to my own what's the word I love? Oh, gumption. Having gumption. Because I was always a very stubborn kid, but it with all these kind of new challenges and things like that, and developed into a very formidable mental toughness that a lot of particularly girls my age did not have. And again, when you're a teenager, it's hard to sit in that like we do, and we do the work now. But as a teen, you operate purely on instinct, but it sticks. And I honestly, it astounds me when I think back and I'm like, how did I manage that? How did I survive? How did I not, cave into, X, Y, or Z? And it all kind of layers on top of each other. And that's why, as frustrating and as cliche as it always is to say, when people say it gets better and you'll look back on this and laugh, or you'll look back on this and think, wow, wasn't I amazing? You really do. You look back and you see it for what it is because you have that distance from it now. And if you can then also look back and not only see it for what it was, but also see like, oh, I survived it. I'm fine. I'm still here and I still turned out a decent person. Radical. Love it.
It's exactly those moments that all of a sudden you're like, when you look back, and I think it can inform your present moment, right? Because if there is a moment where you're like, oh, this is hard, my emotions are running wild, all I want to do is belong. There's this thing that I'm trying to do, or something that like is coming up for me. And if you can have that awareness to be like, whoa, but I know that in these moments of challenge, because I've had these challenges before in my life, on the other side of this, there's like this huge blessing.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we can sort of, if you can remember those things and start to really just like have this whole pile of evidence that you're like, oh no, every single challenge in my life has all of a sudden always become this beautiful thing that where not only did I survive and I'm okay, but I thrived and like I'm a way better human being and I have more mental fortitude and gumption after this. I love
Yeah,
that word.
it's a great word. It's an absolutely great
Yeah.
word. Yeah, it's definitely a journey, and it always sounds so easy to say, when you're talking to anybody else. But, when I look back on that whole period of my life, I mean, you could we could go on a deep dive on all the specifics, but when I look back, I really am stunned um, that things turned out so well. Um, but I also know in the moment, if I had been told, and I was frequently like, oh, it gets better and stuff, that's not helpful in the moment. And at least it never feels helpful. It isn't until you start to see the results of perseverance that you, like I said, you develop that sort of mental toughness that gets you through the next challenging thing. Um, and as a teenager, that's a tough ask sometimes, especially when you got hormones and social pressures and new relationships and feelings and all that kind of stuff. But it's yeah, it can be the making or the breaking of you. And I think it's interesting to see where certain people go after high school based on how they dealt with those issues. Um, because there's some, unfortunately, I mean, being part of the millennial generation, so much of my generation is so unhappy. Um, and you could blame it on all the, external boogeymen, as Kaler calls it. It could be inflation, be inflating, all that kind of stuff, or the fact that we were promised a certain outcome in life and then the world changed. Um, but at the same time, at the end of the day, you're the accountable one, and your life is to do what you will with it. And it's a big thing to try and wrap your head around when you're 15, even to 18, 19 years old. But if you can even just give yourself a little seed of it, it really carries you through and creates a different kind of strength in you that I think protects you when you get older. It becomes a bit of a shield. So it's really been a blessing.
It sounds like you really found a sense of freedom in that. And that was just leading me to my next question is we always talk about there's always these there's an infinite number of definitions of freedom and we explore a lot of that on the podcast and it feels like every single guest that comes on has a different version of what freedom feels like to them. So Eden, what is your version of freedom? What does that look like in your day-to-day life? How do you define freedom for yourself?
Oh, well, I I would say, at the risk of again sounding cliche, I think if I were to sum it all up, what I think freedom is the confidence to be your own person. This could be said in a couple of different ways. Some people say it's being unapologetically yourself, your authentic self, your true self. But I've always liked adding confidence to that and to be your own person. I like that idea of something is my own. I own this. I own, whatever this meat sack of bones and water is walking on this planet. Because that ownership and, like we were just talking about, accountability, I think makes a big difference. Um, and, on adding on to that is when you own something, there is an element of, there's always going to be people who look at you and you startle them, you upset them because you are showing something that they don't have. And it's that ownership frees you from those gazing eyes, that judgment, that need for approval. And if you can embrace, like you said, your true self, I feel like it also affords you, and I think this is a very big part of what my definition of freedom is, it affords you grace with yourself. Because it's one thing to own who you are and be like, well, this is who I am. And there's that one Marilyn Monroe quote that I hate, where it's like, if you can't, love me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. I don't think that's totally accurate. I feel like it's great to own who you are, be your own person. But you also have to have grace to know that that person will fail and that person will fall and that person will fall short of not only other people's expectations, but your own. And I think grace is a very big part of growing and forgiving, because you can own yourself, but yourself is a changing, fluid thing. So not creating a prison out of that. And I do find there are some people that do that who will, like the Marilyn Monroe quote suggests, they're like, well, this is just who I am, deal with it. And that's not helpful either, because now you're rigid and now you're blocking people from changing your mind, from having an impression on you and you having an impression on them. And yeah, I think those two things, the confidence to own who you are, be your own person, and then have grace to know that that's not always going to be perfect.
Love that. Freedom through authenticity.
Yeah,
Yes.
love it. Love it.
Yeah. Oh, I've never even thought about like that. That whole idea of like, well, this is who I am, and you better take me as I am. And I get that there is an aspect of that where there is some unconditional love for like the human being before you. And I also think back to like, if I still walked around saying that, it's like, well, me 3 years ago is a completely different human
Totally
being
different.
from me now. So if I did just constantly be like, well, this is who I am and this is what I think, and these are the things that I hold dear, it's like, okay, well, now you've placed yourself into this little cage of your own shackles, and now you're like, okay, well, now everyone just has to accept me for this, and there's no going to be outside influences on me. And it's like, that's yeah, like you said, very rigid. And I love the idea of like authenticity also means that you are free to change and have grace to change your mind and be like, oh yeah, no, I used to believe that one thing and I was shown evidence of something different. And now I can actually incorporate that new way of thinking.
Yeah. And that's what makes us all amazing. And it's, I find it very fascinating that we live in a time where through the internet or via, the rise of social justice and things like that, we live in a time where everyone says, just be you, just be yourself. They're almost buzzwords now. But at the same time, I've never seen or experienced a time in my life where I felt more like people want me to conform. And it's kind of it's having this sort of flip effect with people. And I mean, I know, based on, how we are and the way we think, I feel like whether it's an opinion you have, whether it's who you are, if you're so rigid and you're so, you're on this staunch path of belief in who you are, and this just is the way it is, it's not going to change. I think what you're doing is a disservice to yourself, because you're setting yourself up to, if something does change in a big way, like heaven forbid you experience some form of grief or some kind of, horrible accident or something, your entire world is going to crumble because you haven't allowed for any flexibility, any kind of ease and flow in your life. And you're going to fall harder. And it's that whole, the heavier they are, the harder they fall kind of thing. And the more heavy you are on who you are, it's going to suck when you fall from the top, because you're going to break. Whereas if you have that kind of will and that willingness to change, and that, like we were talking about, that grace to accept that, things can change. I can change. My opinions can change. I think it saves you a lot, and it gives you a softer landing for when those big shifts happen and when they show up. And they do. Can't run from them. They do.
Yeah, no, there's no way to like, and I think that's what makes like understanding that you can awaken to new ideas and new things. But if you are so rigid to be like, no, I just refuse to look at those things, then all of a sudden it's like having those horse blinders on, like that's a rough way to go through life, because there's a lot of things that are going to shake you to your core to be like, oh, I thought that one thing and I was wrong. And having the grace to be like, yep, I was wrong. My authentic identity, that person over there, she was wrong, and she's like, I'm going to take everything that I know from that and I'm going to like mold it into a different understanding of the world. And like that is like, we're talking now like soul purpose, soul contract type of thing, where you are here to learn.
It's all entangled, isn't it? It's like when I kind of started thinking about these kinds of questions about what freedom is and where I started kind of cultivating my own definition of it, I can follow that thread all through my life and see, well, cultivating this in high school in regards to, social pressures actually ended up serving me then when it came to, for example, like, the pandemic and having the beliefs I did, because I was looking at other people who thought the same things as me, but they didn't have that kind of that hold on it yet, and they would give in, or they'd, step back, or they'd relent, in order for the masses to have their say. And it made me a lot braver. So it's all connected, and you can literally follow it where the genesis of it was.
Yeah. And what would you say is, like, if you could look back to your 13-year-old self, or even yourself a couple years ago, whatever it may be, or someone who maybe was in that position where they're feeling stuck, they're feeling like, oh, something's not right. What would be that little piece of advice or thing that they could do, or a baby step that they could take to start to sort of understand that they're, first of all, going to be okay, and also to keep understanding that, like, they're, yes, listen to that thing. What would you say that piece of advice would be?
Oh, well, I know what I would say, but it's something that I didn't realize until actually last year. Like, I didn't make it into I don't know, a nice little clipped phrase until last year. But I uh, I had this epiphany on the top of a mountain after climbing it. I think I've shared this story at some point. Um, but I had such a hard time getting up this mountain, and the amount of times that I thought, I was like, I'm done. My legs, my mental state, like, I can't do this. The chant that just kept going through my head was, I can do hard things. I can do hard things. And if I had to go back and tell myself anything, it would be that. It would say, you can do hard things. You're not just a machine that's going to go through the motions. You're the main character. And the main character, if you think about it in any terms, movie, film, video game, the main character is the one who has to learn, has to grow, has to seek and find, has to evolve in order to get to the next level. And that's what makes that's what makes the good story. It's just character development. But I would go back and say, you're tougher than you think you are. And you're not going to see it right now, but one day you're going to look back and you're going to realize that all of this gave you what I like to think is a wicked sense of humor. It's going to give you perspective, and it's going to, bring you to the right people at the end of the day. And again, it's going to seem dire at points, but your personal health, your sanity, your mental state, all of that is so much more important and so worth the challenges and the hurdles that are going to come your way. It's really hard when you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it makes you want to give up. But once you start seeing those tiny little sparkles of reprieve, of hope, of whatever it is you're reaching for, it's all worth it. And you are going to look back and go, oh, okay, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change anything, because if any of that hadn't happened, of course I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but if any of that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be who I was. So, I mean, you couldn't pay me enough to go back to high school, but if I had to, I don't think I would have wanted it any other way.
That is powerful. Yeah, you wouldn't want to change any of this. And sometimes, yeah, I look around and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm in the first 2 years of a brand new business, and I've heard from other entrepreneurs and freelancers that are like, yeah, I would not pay anything in the world, or no one could pay me anything in the world to go back to those first 2 years of what you are doing. And I'm like, oh, cool.
Great,
I
thanks for
guess I'm
that.
doing
Yeah.
that. Well, but I also know that, yes, like, that's where the gold is. Like, that is where I'm in this place. I am bumbling around in the dark. I am doing hard things that I never thought I signed up for or wanted to do. And yet, like, I know that there's just this faith in me that I know that, like, 3 years from now, I'm going to look back and be like, wow, I'm so happy I did every single piece of that. And all of the challenges through high school and the social figuring out of like everything that we do in our lives, so valuable. There is no price that you can put on the hard challenges that you go through in life.
No, and I think it's a real, it's a cool exercise for anyone who just, like, I think you phrased it, if someone's feeling stuck or feeling like they really can't get through something, and there's so many different varying degrees of what you could be getting through. Could be just you're feeling like you're in a mental rut. It could be grief over losing someone. It could be the loss of a relationship. It could be a bunch of things. But the exercise I really like to do is to boost myself up, remind myself of everything I have survived. So instead of just, writing a journal entry that, is just like, I'm beautiful, I'm this, I'm that. These are all great affirmations. But again, you can't just shout affirmations at yourself in a mirror and hope that that's going to do something. You have to believe it. And we talk about the undeniable stack of proof that you are who you say you are. And if you can actually go through and systematically, like, I survived a shitload of bullying in high school and I came out okay. I survived X, Y, and Z. By the time you get to the end of the list, you start coming up with other things, big and small. And then you look at this list, you're like, damn, I'm pretty impressed, I gotta say. And it makes everything else seem just a little more manageable. And sometimes that's all you need, is just that little bit more manageable in order to carry it. And it's always, like we said, it's always worth it every single time.
That's powerful. I wouldn't change it. It's so cool to see like that evolution of our human journey. And yeah, you can survive a lot. And turns out you thrive.
Yep.
And you can get through it. And if, the darkness doesn't take over completely, and I know sometimes it feels like it is, it can be really light and beautiful on the other side of it. All right, Eden, is there anything else that you want to leave our listeners with? And then is there anywhere that anybody can find you to connect with you or anything like that?
Well, I do have an Instagram.
Your private
As I said,
Instagram.
it's a private Instagram. And I have a very strict vetting policy. However, at the behest of my agent, I have somebody that's going to be running for me a professional page that I do not touch, that they just post what I'm doing. And that'll probably be up in the next couple months. So it's just my name. It's just Eden Broda. But other than that, I am not on any other social media platform for so many reasons. But I would say, if I was going to leave anybody with anything, just, encompassing this whole wonderful conversation we've had, is, it's one thing to own who you are and have the courage to be unique. But it's another thing to walk through and think that you will, if you get to that point, you will never experience those feelings or hardship again. If anything, if you step out of line and become your own person and go against the grain and all these other, versions of that you can think of, you will often be met with more. You will be met with more questions, more jealousy, more misunderstanding, more people who are insecure. It'll mean losing certain friendships or certain connections. And it's never, I don't want to say it gets easier, but you become so much more formidable in handling these kinds of things, and knowing that it's not a you problem, it's a them problem. And you will also get the discernment to know when, ooh, maybe it is a me problem. Maybe this is something I need to think about. And it's all part of that journey of owning who you are. But don't think it's going to, free you up from all the judgment and criticism that is out there, especially with the online kind of vortex that we are faced with. But just know that it's not, no one's thinking about you or talking about you nearly as much as you think they are. They really aren't. And the only person you're accountable to is yourself.
That's great. Yeah, I feel like that is the true tell, when you can like do things in life and just do them for yourself. It's like, instead of wanting to take the picture to put it on the Instagram or whatever, I feel like we're bringing this conversation full circle. It's like, you are the only person that you're doing this for, and your experience and your understanding of life, and like maybe try just doing something without posting it. Like, see what happens.
Yeah, the world might not explode. It's crazy. Actually have the
And you
fun.
might like enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one I always like to say is the people who, if you're at a fireworks show, all the people who love to take videos of the fireworks. I'm like, why are you doing that? It's so much better if you just stand there and experience it. When are you going to go back on your phone and scroll through all these videos of the fireworks? And it's when you break it down in those little bits, it does seem a bit ridiculous, the idea that you're chronicling or feeling the need to chronicle everything. Just experience. And then if you want to share something, then it becomes more profound and more special.
Love it. I love it. Thank you so much for your time
Of
today, Eden,
course.
and coming on and sharing your story. That was amazing. And I hope that our listeners can take some little pieces of gold away from that and just be a little bit more authentically themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Be brave. Be bold. You can do hard things. Thanks for having me, Carly.
All right, friends, that's a wrap on today's episode of Becoming Unbound. I hope this conversation with Eden inspired you to start to step into being a little bit more authentically you and living your most aligned life. If you loved this episode, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me reach more freedom-minded listeners. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode of Becoming Unbound.